Before we begin, take a deep breath. Inhale slowly through your nose, exhale gently through your mouth. Feel the air move through your body, feel your heartbeat, feel yourself arriving in this moment, because what I'm about to share with you is not just another story, it's a reflection of something many souls silently endure. This is for the ones who feel too much, care too deeply, and give even when they're empty. The ones who carry the weight of others while neglecting their own hearts. Today, I want to tell you what truly happens when a sensitive soul finally stops pleasing everyone and starts choosing themselves. When a sensitive soul decides to stop pleasing everyone, the world does not just notice, it trembles a little, because such a soul has always been the gentle thread holding together the emotions of others. They have been the listener when everyone else wanted to speak, the comforter when no one cared to comfort them. They have been the quiet presence in a loud world, the one who absorbs chaos just to keep the peace. They grew up believing that kindness means always saying yes, that love means always giving more, that peace means never confronting anyone. And so they learned to carry burdens that were never theirs. They apologized when they weren't wrong. They smiled when they were breaking inside. They held the pain of others so tightly that they forgot how to hold themselves. But one day, something changes. It is not loud, not dramatic. It's a moment of stillness, a moment where their heart whispers, enough. It is the day they finally see that constantly pleasing others is not love, it's self-abandonment. They start noticing how much energy they have given to keep others comfortable, how much of their light has been dimmed to make others feel secure. They start realizing that their empathy has been used as a weapon against them, that people who claim to love their softness often took advantage of it. They begin to question the patterns they once called normal. Why do I feel responsible for everyone's happiness? Why do I feel guilty for resting? Why do I always need to explain myself to be understood? And as those questions grow louder, so does their awareness. They begin to see the truth, that people who genuinely care about you never demand you to exhaust yourself for them. They don't need you to shrink. They don't require you to agree. They don't punish you for being authentic. A sensitive soul begins to see that constantly giving without receiving does not make them noble. It makes them empty. They begin to see that being everyone's savior has turned them into their own victim. And in that realization, there's both pain and power. Pain because they see how much they've been used. Power because they finally see that they have a choice. They stop smiling to hide exhaustion. They stop pretending everything is fine when their heart feels drained. They stop apologizing for being quiet, for being emotional, for being too much. They begin to understand that sensitivity is not weakness, it is depth, it is awareness. It is the ability to feel what others cannot, and that, when unprotected, can destroy you. But when directed wisely, it becomes your greatest strength. And so, they begin to set boundaries. They begin to protect their energy. They start saying no without explaining why. They no longer show up out of guilt or fear of being judged. And the moment they do that, the world reacts. The same people who once praised them for being kind now call them cold. The ones who benefited from their giving now call them selfish. They say, "You've changed," and they have. They've changed from someone who constantly betrays themselves for others to someone who honors their truth above all else. And that shift is powerful, because it marks the birth of a new kind of peace, the kind that doesn't depend on approval, the kind that comes from alignment. The sensitive soul realizes that not everyone deserves access to their softness, that love without respect is manipulation, that peace without boundaries is prison. And so they walk away, not in anger, but in awareness, because they have finally learned that their purpose was never to please everyone. It was to live in truth, to love with wisdom, and to shine without permission. The transformation of a sensitive soul is not loud. It does not happen overnight. It unfolds slowly, like dawn breaking after a long, sleepless night. At first it feels confusing and heavy, because for so long their identity was built on being the helper, the healer, the one who gives even when they have nothing left to give. When they begin to pull back, when they begin to say no, when they stop explaining their every emotion, guilt arrives first. It's an old companion, one that whispers, "You're being selfish, you're disappointing people, you're letting them down." But deep inside, another voice starts to rise, quieter, wiser, and stronger. It says, "You've given enough. It's time to give to yourself." That voice is the beginning of awakening. The sensitive soul starts realizing that guilt is not always a sign of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's the echo of conditioning, years of being taught that love must always come at the cost of your own peace. They start to see how often they were praised for self-sacrifice, how people admired them for their patience, their understanding, their endless empathy. But no one ever asked if they were okay. No one noticed the exhaustion behind their smile, the tears they wiped away in silence. And now, for the first time, they do notice. They notice the tension in their body, the tiredness in their spirit, the way they used to rush to fix problems that weren't theirs. They begin to unlearn the habit of overcaring. They realize that not every emotion they feel belongs to them, that they have carried the energy of others for too long. And so they begin the process of release. It's not easy. They will feel guilt when they decline invitations, shame when they choose solitude over company, and doubt when they protect their boundaries. But every time they choose peace over people-pleasing, they regain a piece of their soul. They start spending time in silence, not because they are isolating, but because they are remembering who they are without all the noise. They begin to understand that silence is not emptiness. It is clarity. It is where they can hear their own thoughts without interruption. They start journaling, meditating, walking alone. They start observing rather than reacting. And in those quiet moments, they discover something profound. Peace was never missing. It was simply buried beneath everyone else's expectations. They begin to redefine love, not as endless sacrifice, but as mutual respect. They start to see that boundaries are not walls. They are doors with locks that protect what is sacred. They realize that their sensitivity is a gift, not a curse, but only when it is guided by discernment. They start noticing who truly respects their limits and who only loved them for their compliance. Their relationships begin to shift. Some people will fade away because they no longer get the version that bends to please. But that's okay. Because for every person who leaves, the universe sends someone who values their authenticity. They begin to attract peace instead of chaos, truth instead of flattery, presence instead of attention. They become calmer, more grounded, less reactive. Their emotions still run deep, but now they flow with direction, not confusion. And this shift, though subtle, is revolutionary. They are no longer chasing validation. They no longer need to explain why they care differently, why they love deeply, or why they choose silence over drama. They stop trying to prove their worth to those who can't see it. Instead, they rest in the knowing that the right people will never make them feel guilty for being themselves. The sensitive soul transforms from a people-pleaser into a peacekeeper, not of the world's peace, but their own internal harmony. And as they walk this path, they begin to understand something sacred. Protecting their peace is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of self-love. And from that love, they rise, calmer, wiser, freer than they have ever been. When a sensitive soul stops pleasing everyone, they begin to attract truth, real, unfiltered truth. For the first time in their life, they see things clearly without the fog of emotional obligation or guilt clouding their vision. Their heart, which was once stretched thin between everyone else's needs, finally has space to breathe. And in that space, they start to notice something profound. Not everyone they called friend was truly a friend. Some only stayed because of what they received, the comfort, the validation, the constant emotional availability. When the sensitive soul no longer provides that energy, their silence becomes louder than any words could ever be. People start revealing themselves, not through their intentions, but through their reactions to your boundaries. Their absence begins to expose the truth you once refused to see. And at first, that truth hurts deeply, because the sensitive soul never loved half-heartedly. They gave with sincerity, with openness, with all the light they had, so when they see people pull away, when they stop overgiving, it feels like rejection, but slowly they realize it's not rejection, it's revelation. The universe is showing them who belongs and who doesn't. And that realization brings peace, not pain. They understand now that their circle may grow smaller, but it grows purer. They no longer crave a crowd, they crave connection. They no longer seek attention, they seek alignment. Their relationships transform. Conversations become deeper, energy becomes sacred, and silence becomes meaningful. They learn that not every silence needs to be filled, not every conflict needs to be solved. Some things are meant to be left as they are. They discover that peace is not found in the approval of others, but in the company of those who see you clearly and still choose to stay. They start to value quality over quantity. They would rather sit alone in authenticity than be surrounded by people who only love their convenience. The sensitive soul stops fearing solitude because they realize solitude is not loneliness, it is sanctuary. It's the place where they reconnect with their essence, where they heal from years of self-betrayal, where they learn to love themselves without needing anyone's confirmation. And the more they love themselves, the more they attract people who match that vibration. People who don't take advantage of their softness but honor it. People who don't demand their energy but cherish it. They start noticing subtle shifts. The conversations that once drained them now bore them. The chaos that once fascinated them now feels heavy. The need to prove themselves disappears because they no longer seek to be understood by everyone. They understand something powerful. Now, you can't please people who are committed to misunderstanding you, and you don't need to. They finally stop explaining themselves. They stop justifying their boundaries. They stop seeking closure from those who were never capable of giving it, because they've learned that closure doesn't come from others, it comes from acceptance. They let go of what once broke them, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. They understand that love without respect is manipulation, and forgiveness does not mean access. They begin to walk through life lighter, calmer, more grounded. They no longer chase what leaves, they no longer fight what ends. They trust the timing of their growth. They understand that what is meant for them will never require them to betray themselves again. And with that awareness comes freedom, the kind of freedom that radiates quietly. It's not about proving anyone wrong, it's about finally living in truth. They no longer need to shout their worth, their energy speaks for them. And those who once underestimated them start to notice the shift, not because the sensitive soul became louder, but because their silence became unshakable. They are no longer defined by how much they give to others, but by how deeply they honor themselves. And in that moment, they understand losing people who never valued you is not a loss, it's liberation. The world reacts differently when a sensitive soul changes, because they are no longer predictable. People who were once comfortable controlling them begin to feel uneasy. Their calm silence, which used to be submission, is now power. Their boundaries, once invisible, are now firm like stone. And the same people who used to take advantage of their kindness start saying, "You've changed." Yes, they have changed. But what they don't understand is that this change was survival. It was evolution. The sensitive soul no longer operates from the need to be liked. They have stopped trying to fix people who refuse to grow. They have learned that not every broken thing needs their healing touch. Some people are meant to be observed, not repaired, and that realization transforms everything. At first, the world will test them. People will try to guilt-trip them, remind them of the old version that always said yes, always made time. always forgave without question. They'll try to provoke reactions, they'll twist words, they'll play the victim. But the sensitive soul now moves differently. They don't argue, they detach. They don't explain, they understand. They don't shout, they choose silence. Because they've realized that energy speaks louder than words. They understand now that peace doesn't come from controlling the chaos. It comes from refusing to participate in it. Their power lies in stillness. They no longer rush to prove their intentions. They know that those who truly know them don't need explanations, and those who demand them will never be satisfied anyway. They stop chasing fairness in situations that were designed to be unfair. Because wisdom has taught them that not everyone deserves access to your emotions. Some people feed on your reaction, and the best revenge is to starve them with silence. The sensitive soul becomes the calm in their own storm. They start choosing their battles wisely. They no longer fight to be understood, they only fight for their peace. They become emotionally disciplined, choosing presence over reaction. They've learned that not everything requires their attention, and not every insult needs an answer. They no longer use kindness as a weapon against themselves. Instead, they use awareness as armor. They can still be compassionate, but now that compassion has boundaries. They can still forgive, but they no longer forget the lesson. They can still love, but they no longer lose themselves in love. They begin to see the beauty in letting people face the consequences of their actions. They understand that enabling others' comfort is not love. It's interference. They let go of the need to protect everyone from pain because they finally understand some pain is a teacher. They now move with quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need validation. Their aura changes, it becomes calm but firm, soft but strong. They are no longer drained by the energy around them because they've learned to guard it fiercely. They spend more time in solitude, not out of loneliness, but because peace has become addictive. They prefer silence over meaningless noise, depth over distraction, truth over comfort. Their words become fewer but sharper, every sentence measured, every response intentional. Because now they understand the value of their energy, and they refuse to spend it recklessly. Sensitive soul begins to embody what true strength looks like: grace under pressure, stillness under chaos, compassion without attachment. They become the kind of person who no longer reacts to everything that disturbs the surface, because they found peace in the depths. And when the world tries to shake them, they no longer fall. They observe, they breathe, they respond from awareness, not emotion. They have turned their sensitivity into wisdom, their vulnerability into strength. And that is when the world begins to see them differently, not as fragile, but as unshakable, not as soft, but as sacred, because they have mastered the art of protecting their inner world while walking through a noisy, ungrateful one. And that mastery, that calm-rooted energy, is something no one can take away again. And then something beautiful happens. The sensitive soul no longer seeks to be understood. They begin to live from a place of deep understanding. They no longer chase love, they become love. They no longer strive to be seen. They become the light that illuminates without demanding attention. This transformation is quiet, but it changes everything. They stop needing validation because they have built a foundation of self-worth that no external opinion can shake. They realize that peace was never something they had to earn from others. It was something they were born with, but lost through years of pleasing and performing for love. Now they return home to themselves. They begin to feel whole again, not because life becomes easier, but because they have learned how to stand still in the storm. They stop running from loneliness because they understand that solitude is where the soul speaks the loudest. They start finding beauty in ordinary moments: the morning silence, the sound of their own breath, the feeling of peace that comes when no one is demanding anything from them. They begin to understand the sacredness of energy and how to protect it fiercely. They no longer allow access to those who drain them. They no longer open their hearts to those who come with empty hands. They no longer confuse attachment with love or attention with care. They have learned the difference between people who clap for them publicly and those who pray for them privately. And now, they only make space for the latter. They begin to move differently, not out of fear but out of awareness. They say less but mean more. They do less but feel more. They no longer need to perform kindness. They embody it naturally because it now flows from fullness, not emptiness. They realize that love is not about giving yourself away. It's about sharing what overflows from within. They no longer measure their worth by how much they give, but by how deeply they stay true to their soul. They stop living reactively and start living intentionally. Every decision, every word, every silence is guided by purpose. They stop over-explaining, stop overthinking, stop overgiving. They start living with ease, with grace, with alignment. And in that stillness, they meet their higher self, the version of them that has always existed beneath the layers of fear and self-doubt. That version is calm, grounded, and deeply aware of its own power. The sensitive soul realizes that power was never about dominance or control. It was about presence, the ability to remain centered no matter what the world throws at you. That is true mastery. They now radiate peace in a way that can be felt before it's seen. Their silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. Their boundaries no longer feel like barriers. They feel like sacred gates guarding a temple. And in that temple lies their soul, finally resting, finally whole. They understand that not everyone will understand this version of them, and that's okay, because the goal was never to be understood by everyone, it was to understand themselves completely. They no longer take things personally because they recognize that how others treat them is a reflection of their own inner world, not theirs. They forgive easily, but they remember wisely. They love without attachment, help without losing themselves, care without carrying the weight of others' emotions. And this new peace becomes unshakable. The same world that once drained them now becomes their playground. The same sensitivity that once felt like a curse now becomes their compass. They can walk through darkness without fear because they carry their own light. They are no longer at war with who they are. They have embraced every part, the soft, the strong, the broken, the healed. And from that acceptance arises a grace that cannot be taught, a grace that flows naturally from the one who has returned home to their true essence. And that is the final truth. When a sensitive soul stops pleasing everyone, they don't become hard, they become free. They don't lose their kindness, they refine it. They don't stop caring, they care consciously. They no longer beg to be chosen, they choose themselves. And in doing so, they discover that the power they spent years searching for in others has been quietly waiting inside them all along. When a sensitive soul finally finds this freedom, life begins to unfold in an entirely new rhythm. They no longer live as a reaction to the world, they live as an expression of their truth. Their energy shifts from seeking to radiating, from chasing to attracting. They no longer fear being misunderstood because they have learned that understanding oneself is the highest form of peace. Their life becomes simpler, not because everything around them changes, but because their internal landscape has transformed. They stop fighting for attention, for space, for validation, and in doing so, they create a life rooted in calm awareness. They begin to move with quiet intention, trusting that whatever aligns with their peace will stay, and whatever disturbs it will naturally fall away. They no longer cling to outcomes because they've learned to trust the flow of life. They understand now that what is meant for them will never demand them to betray their boundaries or silence their spirit. They realize that every ending was never a loss. It was a redirection, a necessary closing so that something purer could enter. They start to see the divine intelligence in every delay, every disappointment, every heartbreak. Because now they can see from a higher perspective. They understand that the universe has always been guiding them toward alignment, not approval. The sensitive soul, once burdened by emotion, has now become a master of emotional awareness. They no longer suppress their feelings, they observe them. They allow sadness without drowning in it, anger without destruction, love without attachment. This is emotional mastery, the ability to feel deeply without losing balance. They begin to see their sensitivity as a sacred tool, a gift that connects them to life in ways others cannot comprehend. They feel the subtle energies in conversations, the truth behind words, the emotions hidden beneath smiles, and instead of being drained by it, they now know how to protect and direct it. They can sense when to engage and when to walk away. They can love without rescuing, listen without absorbing, help without depleting. They've learned that compassion without wisdom is chaos, but compassion guided by wisdom is power. And that is who they've become: powerful in stillness, wise in sensitivity, unshakable in peace. Their presence changes the room, not because they demand attention, but because their energy carries weight. It's the kind of presence that silences chaos without a word. That's the quiet strength of a soul that has healed itself. They no longer rush, they no longer force, they flow. They no longer measure life by achievements but by alignment, how closely their actions reflect their truth. They find joy in simplicity, a cup of tea, a morning breeze, a moment of gratitude. They begin to notice that peace isn't something you find once. It's something you choose daily, in thoughts, in reactions, in what you allow into your energy field. And because they choose peace repeatedly, their entire world begins to mirror that choice. The people they meet, the opportunities they attract, the spaces they inhabit, all begin to reflect their inner calm. They are no longer afraid to be alone, because solitude now feels sacred. It's in solitude that they connect with the divine, their intuition, their purpose. And that purpose is no longer about fixing others. It's about embodying truth, showing through presence. That peace is possible even in a chaotic world. They become an example, a quiet reminder that you can be gentle and powerful, kind and firm, sensitive and strong. They teach others not by preaching, but by being. They no longer chase love, they inspire it. They no longer seek understanding, they emanate clarity. And as they continue walking this path, they realize something profound. The journey was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who they always were beneath the layers of fear, guilt, and pleasing. The sensitive soul has come full circle. They have turned pain into purpose, wounds into wisdom, and silence into strength. And now when they look in the mirror, they no longer see the exhausted giver. They see the awakened guardian of their own peace. They smile, not because life is perfect, but because they finally are free. Free from the need to prove, free from the fear of rejection, free from the chains of approval. They have learned the ultimate truth. When a sensitive soul stops pleasing everyone, they don't lose themselves. They finally meet themselves. And in that meeting, they discover the purest form of strength, the strength to live fully, authentically, unapologetically, as who they were always meant to be.